This video is recorded to help students understand the module in Excel called the pivot tables. So in this video, we'll use the pivot tables module to build a table like this. It's called a cross tabulation. Moreover, it's a two-way cross tab, and we'll talk about it closer to the end of the video. What's important right now is to understand that most tables are not drawn in this way right away when they're drawn. They are a result of some analysis, which includes several steps, and it involves certain design logic, which leads to the name of this table. This is two-way tabulation. So what we have here is one large category, which is gender, and it has two subcategories in it, male and female. We have another large category which has two subcategories, and that is the attitude towards alcohol. Not an attitude that has to be described in many sentences, but it's an answer to a simple question. The question is, do you drink alcohol? And there are two types of answers, no and yes. So just take a note of this being a 2x2, and in a couple of minutes we'll talk about it in more detail. So it's a simple research exercise. So the next step is to collect your answers. Imagine you have created a form, which can actually be created on Google Forms, which has these two questions. Do you drink alcohol? Yes or no? And are you female or male? These checkboxes could be inserted from the Developer tab, which I turned on before this video was started. Just from here. We're not going to talk too much about it, but I'd like for you to know that it's available. Also, the properties could be easily changed. You should see what's happening when the respondent actually checks the box. You go to the value and it becomes, if it says true, it's checked. So just some of these things may be useful for better understanding of the abilities of Excel to create all kinds of tools. Now, once those willing to answer submit their answers, you'll receive something like this in the form. The headers that correspond to the questions, and the answers will be shown in this column. You can see that there are two values. We have only two columns, but each of them has two values. Okay, and this is what the pivot table module is designed to analyze. Once again, this is made deliberately simple so you can follow the logic that the pivot table is going to follow. And we'll just go ahead and insert the pivot table here. Okay. Quite honestly, normally I would first create an Excel table, and that would allow the pivot table module to grab data without hesitation. But I've already tried this earlier, just a minute before this recording, and it knows, the module knows to follow the data, which is the only data found here. Okay, so we go from C5 to D96, and that was correct initially. Okay, so the options here will allow us to place our two-way table created by the pivot table, which we can now also call the pivot table, on a new worksheet, and we'll just say OK. So what we now have is something we don't normally see in our Excel sheets. So we have a tool right here. It's called Pivot Table Fields. The tool has analyzed the data under gender and drink headers, and it's offering us to create rows and columns for our new table. And also we can create the values and filters that will work for our analysis. Just to remind you, what we are shooting for is this crosstab, this cross-tabulation. So for it to make sense, these answers, yeses and nos, actually have to be collected for the analysis to be valid and for the table to be interpretable. So once again, we're using a special tool built into Microsoft Excel called the pivot tables. So if you remember, the gender category was under rows, and to drink or not, that was the columns. And you see what has happened here. So we're starting to build automatically our table, but you can see for it to be more legible, we have to manually stretch this column, and we'll do some more manual work in just a minute. This table is very simple, so I'm going to zoom in for even better legibility so you can see what's going on. It makes sense that the female subcategory is listed first because alphabetically it is first. The table at which we looked initially was built in a software package called SPSS, Statistical Package for Social Sciences, a very common tool, but to really use that tool, some experience with Excel is definitely necessary, and that's what we're doing here. Okay, so we have our subcategories. Now we need to get the counts. Once again, we have to have the answers that pertain to consumption or lack thereof of alcohol. In this case, I put the drink field into the values quadrant. So we're almost there. We have our positives and negatives. We have totals, which the pivot table tool calls grand total. And we have just a small difference here, since male was definitely entered first before the analysis began. This subcategory is listed under gender first. That's how it happened. But we're almost there. You can see that we just need some manual touch-up for our automatically built table, and we'll be done. Okay, I need both of my hands now, so I'm going to put down the microphone. Well, that's about it. Okay, what we wanted is this, and you can see what we've gotten here. So this is a very simple and I hope helpful example of the use of the pivot table module in Excel. I'll let you compare these two tables before moving further. So one more thing to remind you of is that for this sorting to be correct, the spelling in the responses has to be perfect. It's not easy to mess up the Y and the N, and we only had to write female and male once. So that is easy to check. After that, all you need to remember is that the pivot table code, the software that actually is embedded there, knows how to scan this, compare, summarize, and then display in the table. Okay, right here. Also, for our very simple purposes, this filter here is absolutely unnecessary. So I'll just get rid of this text by giving it the font color identical to the background color. And right here, I'll do the very well familiar command, which is merge and center. So we'll make this look a little more like the table we are recreating here. This could be count, actually. I can do that. No problem. Well, something like that. So I don't want to spend too much time. You get the idea. There's a way. There are many ways that Excel offers in which we can make this table look exactly like the one we started with. Okay. Now, a brief review of data tabulation as a separate topic, which I believe should be the first topic in any Excel book. But since we don't have it in our book, I'll just do it with the slides here. So basically, tabulation is a way to organize data for better representation. Humans like easily understood images, and in reality, table is really an image of data, something that we want to show to someone who needs to know that. Okay, so you have seen that the original data collected with the questionnaire was long. We had a lot of text, and you couldn't even see it all without scrolling down. So it made sense to tabulate the data collected in a way that which will not require any scrolling or thinking for a long period of time as to what it means. We've dealt with categories and subcategories. So for anyone involved in tabulating data, that person has to have some ability to categorize data and organize it otherwise, specifically create subcategories of that data. Okay, a table is an arrangement of rows and columns, and you can read the rest of it because we've talked about this already. But the actual types of tabulation are, for the first time, discussed in this video. Inevitably, the topic of tabulation leads to statistics. When we talk about statistics, the data we collect is recorded in frequencies. Here's a very simple one-way tabulation. Correct. 10 people were asked where they would like to go on vacation. So there was one category within which we had 3 destinations, and 5, 3, and 2 add up to 10. So the frequency here is related to one large category. Okay. We can call these locations subcategories, although they're just locations. This was one choice, basically call it destination. Therefore, this is a one-way tabulation. What we have done was a little more complex. There was a two-way tabulation, and the data was tabulated according to 2 characteristics, which were at play at the same time. Okay, so this was consumption or rejection of alcohol. Now, this crosstab actually has an official name, which becomes even more important as you go from simple statistics to something more complex, such as ANOVA. Okay, so our table is 2 by 2. We're going to see why. It's good to try to remember this type, and it's called so because we have a 2 by 2 data represented in it. So that's what we were after. First, twos, we have a larger category with 2 subcategories. And the second one, to drink alcohol, yes or no. So this was 2 by 2. Okay. Once again, like this, it's working, which is good. And there could be a more complex case. Okay. There could be several characteristics and categories. That would be more complex tabulation. And you can look at the students' progress at the university. So depending on the year that they're in school, they could be characterized as freshman, sophomore, junior, etc. And here's a table which now shows 4 subcategories. Okay, and another one, the familiar larger categories, which has 2 subcategories, gives us the 2. So we have 4 by 2. It's a more complex table than the one we have actually built. It's called a long table 4 by 2. And I think we'll do another pivot table exercise, which will produce something more complex than a 2 by 2 table. Okay, I hope this was helpful. You can find the Excel file with the original data on the contents of week 11, and you can use it to try to reproduce this on your own machine.